What's one skill you were terrible at back at 30, but you've completely mastered now?
Asking for help. Asking's a muscle. And the
Mm,
more we ask, the more we practice that asking muscle, the bigger the asks we can make. And I used to think that asking was a sign that I'd failed or that I shouldn't need help. I think my 30-year-old self would look at the kind of things I ask for now and how dare you ask for that? Because they can only say no. And my life expands when I ask for stuff. When we ask for help, we are literally giving that person the gift of helping. By not asking for help, I believe we're actually withholding a gift from someone.
what if the door you thought was closed was never actually locked? Welcome to What I Wish I Knew at 30, the podcast where we talk honestly about resilience, identity, and the moments that test who we really are. My guest today is Sam Smith, former Harlequins and Worcester Warrior, rugby player, and author of The Door Was Never Locked. This is a conversation that goes far beyond sport. From the outside, Sam's world was built on strength, performance, and expectation. But behind the game was a very different story, one of pressure, mental health, self-doubt, and learning how to keep going when the path forward wasn't clear. Sam's journey is about setbacks, second chances, and the quiet realization that sometimes it's not about forcing doors open, it's about recognizing the ones that were never truly locked. If you've ever felt written off, underestimated, or unsure how to come back stronger, this episode will resonate deeply. Make sure you follow or subscribe so these conversations reach you when you need them. Thank you so much for your support. Sam, welcome to What I Wish I Knew at 30. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
You're very welcome. So Sam, let's just get straight into it. Let's rewind the clock. Just explain for our audience, take us back to your 30-year-old self. Paint the picture. Where were you living? What were you doing day to day?
Yeah. So I'm 35 now, so not too long ago.
No.
Yeah. Just moved to Bristol in my 30s. I would have just had my second son, Nelson. He was born just as we moved to Bristol. He's 5 now, and my eldest Freddie is 6. Yeah, that was my family setup. I was living with their mum at the time. We're no longer together now, but yeah, that was sort of my family setup. And at the time, I had a coffee business, so I started Wayland's Yard in 2016 after I retired from rugby, and grew that to 3 restaurants. And then we also then opened a coffee roasters called Odkin, which was about the same time as I moved to Bristol. I decided to have a child, move house, and start a second business all in the same month. So that was a bit busy
Okay, what do
one.
you want about that?
Not one I'd recommend.
No. So going back to that time, what were you quietly worried about at that time?
So I would have, yeah, it's about 5. I would have been about 5 years into my business post retiring from rugby. I was stuck in this cycle of growth for the sake of growth. Well, I believed it was going to bring me happiness and fulfillment. I just kept setting markers and milestones further and further off into the distance. And every time I hit them, I actually felt worse because I ran out of a little bit of hope every time. I think I had this idea that when I opened my first coffee shop, that would be, I'd feel fulfilled and I'd feel complete, and I didn't. And then I go to, well, I must have to open a second one. And I felt worse when I opened the second one. And then it's like, well, when we hit 1 million in revenue, when we hit 2 million in revenue, and I kept moving through all these markers, and I just started to feel more and more empty and hollow the more I achieved. And the more I was starting to realize probably in my 30s that maybe I was playing the wrong game.
It's an interesting concept, isn't it? I mean, so how did you measure success at that time? Were you seeing that as something? How did you measure its success in that time? And do you have a very different definition now?
Yes. Yeah. So for me, success then was I think I felt so, my whole thing growing up was a feeling of not being good enough. And so I was, through my rugby career, through my entrepreneurial career, I was constantly trying to create this outward image of success, which was, I was just playing the game that we're taught to play of the bigger your business or the more medals you win, the better your life is in inverted commas, or the more successful I was. So I was very deep into that game of how am I being perceived by others? Am I proving myself to be successful? Am I plugging the holes that I felt were within me? And that's an infinite game that we could play until we die and we'll never win. I now know that there is nothing that I could do outside of me that will change how I feel on the inside. And for me, success these days is how many days a week do I spend with my boys? For me, it's like I'm at every pickup and every drop off because that's what's important to me. And rarely working in the holidays. That's what success is to me now. Is that have I created a life where I'm actually spending my time doing the things that are most important to me.
So for our listeners, if we had met back then when you were 30, would you have said that you were confident, or were you just convincing yourself that you were?
So I was very confident in my ability to create stuff and make things happen. I've pretty much in my whole life, if I've said I'm going to do something, I've ended up doing it. And that has been great and I've had amazing experiences. But what was underneath the surface was just this sense of slight emptiness and hollowness and not enoughness. I was confident in my ability and I believed I wasn't good enough. So I've probably held that kind of paradox. And for me at that time, that was quite a confusing thing to hold. I would look at my life and I could see that from the outside, it would look really great. And I would often have old rugby teammates say, "Oh, your life post sport looks amazing. Like you've done the thing that lots of people say they want to do, which is go and start a successful business." And I would hear that and I could hear it. And on the other hand, I was like, but I don't feel it. So there was a real disconnect between what it looked like and what it felt like.
And if you look back now to when you were 30, what was something that you were absolutely certain about at 30, but now you realize you had completely wrong? We've probably touched a little bit on.
Yeah, I think at 30, it was probably starting to crack open this idea that it was something outside of me that was going to bring a sense of completion and fullness. 2 years after I retired, so I retired at 26. When I was 28, I was really at rock bottom post retiring. I was suicidally depressed, drinking lots of drugs. I was in a very, very dark place, and I had a regular at my coffee shop called Hugh, who I always say to everyone, he must have watched me declining over the first 2 years of coming in and buying coffees. And one day he came and put his arm around my shoulder and said, "Sam, should we go for a coffee?" And he was he is a therapist and a life coach. And I kind of knew what he was getting at. And I was very resistant because I didn't feel like I was, now I can see I wasn't feeling like I deserved the help. But thankfully, he was fairly persistent, and I went for that coffee and we ended up working together, and he really turned my life around in a very, very quick period. But I was still, at 32 years after that, I was still kind of, that idea of my external identity can complete me was still there. It was still had its claws in me probably, but it was starting to crack open.
Well, I mean, you'd had, by the time you were 30 or by the time you were under 20, you'd played for England under 16s, under 18s, under 20s. So you'd had a good career at that point. At what point did you start your coffee business?
Yeah, so I got injured when I was 25, and I was out for rehab that for a year and had to retire when I was 26. So that was never part of my kind of big plan of life. I think when I started playing at 18, I thought I'd still be playing at 35. So I'd still be playing now. Actually quite glad I'm not. But that just pulled the rug from under my feet. All of my self-worth and value was in my identity as a rugby player. It's one of those jobs where people find it very interesting. So you go to a party or a wedding, or you meet someone and they want to know about who you are and what you do. And for someone who is coming from a place of not feeling good enough, it's a really useful job to have. And when that was kind of taken away, it was a complete crisis of identity about who am I now? Like, all of my value is there, and it's not, I can't call myself that anymore. Now looking back subconsciously, I think what I did was I go, oh, well, being a founder or an entrepreneur, that's also interesting to people. So I was like, I just become one of those. So I just picked up another interesting identity and put that hat on. And that's why I started a business underneath it all, really. It was something that was forced upon me, but something that the more serious my injury became, the more energy and attention I put into starting the business, because I realized that I really had to.
And because it, as you said, it gave you a different identity and an identity which again was that external validation.
Yes.
Mm. And I think that's a really important part to make for a lot of our listeners, because that external validation is it's a very normal concept. It's a very normal thing for a lot of people to always be chasing that external validation. And it seems as though when your rugby career changed and you went into the world of the entrepreneur, how did your mindset change then?
Well, I applied like a professional sporting mindset to starting a business. So I was incredibly committed and
Mm.
was willing to do anything to make it work. And I just kind of applied myself in exactly the same way as I did as a rugby player into the business. And it was very useful in building a business to have that level of mindset, that belief of I can do anything, is even when something bad was happening, there was always this inner belief of I'll work it out.
Which I'm sure you did. But what was the part that no one saw? What was the internal battle? And you've touched on it a little bit, but what was the internal battle that you were having while trying to keep it all together?
Yeah, so this deep sense of not being good enough and an inability to sit with and be with the big emotions that I was feeling, having had this career taken away through injury, I didn't have the capacity at the time to be with that. So instead of sitting with those feelings, talking about them, asking for help, I drank and took drugs or worked. I used those three things really as tools to not be stuck in my head and not be alone with myself, or not have to listen to the voice that was speaking in very unkind ways. And I'd say that period was probably 4 years, 4 or 5 years post rugby, where I was probably either drinking, taking drugs, or working. It was those three things non-stop through that period as a way of distracting myself from myself, and kind of knowing that I was doing it, but also at that point not seeing that there was any other option. It was the best option I had at the time to get through. And I think I was very good at hiding it from people. Like I said, from the outside, lots of people probably saw what I was creating and thought, well, he must have his head screwed on to be doing that. But actually, that was just another one of my coping mechanisms.
I mean, because obviously it sounds as though it was a pretty dark time, a lot of changes in your life. What was the point when you actually decided, well, I'm not giving up on this. I need to look at my life. I need to actually work out what I'm going to be doing, what I'm doing and where I'm going. How did that come about?
So that happened. I started dating Emma, and the mother of my two boys. And 3 months after we started dating, we found out that she was pregnant with Freddie. And I can remember exactly where I was stood when she called me. I was in a prep kitchen in our cafe in Worcester, and she told me that she was pregnant, and I just had this full body rush. Like every cell, every part of me came online of this sense of this child has to be born. And it was the first time I really remember feeling just the sort of wisdom of my body just screaming at me, like, this thing has to happen. And my mind was relatively loud of like, what are you talking about? You've only been together for 3 months. This doesn't make sense. But the sense I had in my body was so strong that actually it was overpowered that voice, probably for the first time in my life. And that moment, it was like I was already working with Hugh at that moment, and I had already made huge strides into coming back to myself and shifting how I was with myself. But that was the moment where I said to myself, I've got 9 months to sort this out.
So sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, I've got 9 months. I don't want to be, when I'm a father in 9 months' time, I don't want to be this guy. And that was the catalyst that really changed everything for me.
A wonderful thing that changed how you looked at life?
Yeah. That
Yeah.
I reference it as inner knowing or inner wisdom. Like that was my wisdom coming online, really coming online for the first time. And I listened to it. And since that moment, I've had a completely different relationship with what what I listen to. I think in the book, I talk about trusting signal and tuning out noise. And to me, that there is this signal that runs through us, which is like, I believe is a direct dial to infinite wisdom. And we're so busy in our lives that we don't ever pay attention to it, or we rarely even notice it's there, but it's actually always there for us to tune into. And it always knows what to do. And I had such a strong sensation of it that there was no doubt in my mind that I could live my life moving forward, trusting in that.
And I think also, that sudden awareness that actually it's not about what's going on outside, it's about what's going on inside is the most important guidance for everything. And I completely agree with you. We completely override our intuition so often. And I think at the peril of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to live a life tuned into that signal is what can only lead to something that's magical and so much bigger and more expansive than our mind could ever conjure up. I believe if we create a life where we just think our way through, we'll be limited by what our mind can perceive and believe in. And actually tuning into this signal that's bigger than us, it forces us to expand. And it's way more exciting. But we do need to put down the idea that we know best, because the signal isn't always comfortable to follow, but it does always lead to something really magical.
And do you think with a lot of high achievers that they are very much, or a lot of people are very much about that external validation?
I think that from my experience of teammates in rugby, and also then the athletes I've worked with as a coach and the entrepreneurs I work with as a coach, my experience, and I'm not basing this on data, is that the kinds of people that build things that change the world and create huge value for others are often coming from some sort of sense of lack. And there's something in there there's a story that they have about themselves from the past that's driving this, and it can create wonderful things in the world, but it doesn't necessarily always create the most peaceful experience of creating that thing.
That's the ultimate, isn't it? Having that peace inside when the outside world doesn't dictate what's going on in you. And I agree, that's a beautiful place to be. If you could sit across the table from your 30-year-old self, what are the 3 things that you would want your 30-year-old self to truly understand, not just to hear, but to really, really understand?
I think for me, there's only one thing, and it's something that I remind myself of all the time. Again, I believe that life shows us what we're meant to see when we're meant to see it. So I believe that my 30-year-old self was seeing everything that he needed to see in that moment. But for me now, knowing this, and I can trace my whole life back to see that this was true. Like, I always knew what I needed to know when I needed it. Like, it showed up, whether it was a teacher or whether it was an insight or whether it was an opportunity. Like, these things show up exactly at the right moment. And for me now, like, carrying that for the rest of my life is, I always know that I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, and I know exactly what I need to know. There's nothing more in this moment right here, right now, which I need to know. And I guess that would be the one thing I could have shared with him, which I think would have been useful to him, to really trust that the experience that he was having was perfect and he wasn't supposed to be having any other experience. Otherwise he would have been.
It's that simple, isn't it?
Yeah. What's here, what's present is what's here and what's present. We can't change that. But what we can change is how we relate to what's here. And it's that way of relating to what's here that dictates whether we suffer or whether we're at peace.
Mm.
It doesn't actually matter with what's present. It's our perception and our relationship to it.
And also keeping that awareness that we have a choice about how we relate to it. And I think
Yes.
that's something that a lot of people don't truly understand, that actually we all have choice and we also have responsibility to make choices. And not making a choice is also a choice. So
Yes.
I think that's something that, yeah, that I see in a lot of people when I'm coaching, that they don't believe that they have choice. And I think, when you look back at your sort of 28-year-old self or 30-year-old self and you were in that messy situation, not then, would you say that it was about really not being aware that you had choice?
Yeah, I think back then, and I think this is how most people view life, is that we use language to describe the reality in front of us.
Mm.
But what I say now is that we actually use language to create the reality in front of us. So I think there's a guy that I love called Trevor Timbeck who says we don't see our world, we speak our world. And so I can look at one situation, you can look at one situation, and we can have totally different experiences of that because of the language we're using to describe it, whether it's through thought or through spoken word. And that's one of the most powerful levers anyone has to change their situation, is to start talking about it differently.
Changing the perspective on things.
Yeah.
Do you think that, talking about perspectives, and do you think that sort of people today in their 30s are under more pressure than you were back? I mean, it's only 5 years ago for you, and it's a few more years ago for me. But do you think they're under like different pressures, or the same pressures?
I guess in every generation there are different pressures, but the weight of those pressures probably feels relatively similar to every human. It's not the outside world that is creating the pressure, it's how we're languaging that outside
Mm.
world. So the idea that, for me anyway, the idea that the world out there can make me feel something on the inside doesn't work for me, because there's no agency and there's no power in that, and there's no freedom. If I look at a political situation and I say that is making me feel angry, I'm giving away all of my power. I can't affect that, but I can shift how I'm languaging it, how I'm seeing it. And all of a sudden I take the power back and I'm able to create my own inner experience.
And would you say that that was the biggest mind shift that that came about for you? Is that you actually stopped giving away your power? You actually realized that it was actually all internal. It was about being in that situation where you actually have control over everything in your life.
Yes. I think that's the only way to step back into peace, is to see that it's the idea that we have to step out to find it that is
Mm.
where we can find it, because it's not out there. If we say that when I have the job or when I get promoted I'll feel happy, like we're creating the idea that it's the job that creates my happiness. To me, there's not a lot of freedom in that, and we
Not
can
at all.
realize that actually it's the chasing of that which creates the separation from what we are, which is innate happiness, peace, joy, love. Anyway, as a resting being in this world.
I love that. How you mean you work with clients, and how do you take somebody through that journey and actually allow them to feel that for themselves? How do you create that awareness for them?
I think essentially our work together is a returning to that innate sense of peace and love and freedom and joy, and noticing all the layers of story and identity that they've created that takes them away from that. So
Mm.
it's a removal of what's in the way rather than a bringing in of more or a learning. Or I think think a lot about, can we create more access to what we already are or what we already have. I think a lot of
Mm.
the stories we have about ourselves take us away from our innate gifts, and people focus on, well, I need to learn more, I need to read more, I need to learn this framework. And actually it's, what if you started to just notice all the stories that you've created that are in the way of who you are being expressed effortlessly.
And just be able to sit with yourself.
Yeah.
Mm. So Changing topic a little bit, but what was the best advice you ever received, and were you ready to hear it at the time?
When I was planning the first coffee shop, I sat down with a guy called Frank who owned a pub in Worcester, and we'd become really friendly. And he's amazing, amazing operator and really good at what he did. And he said to me, "You'll never ever be able to please more than 50% of the people in this city with what you create. And the likelihood is it will be more like 10%. And you," he said, "if you focus on trying to please everyone, there'll be a tipping point where, yes, you might start pleasing the 50% that hate what you do, but as soon as you start pleasing them, the current 50% who love what you do will stop coming." It was real permission to me to just create that shop, that business in exactly the way that I wanted to create it. And it was such an expression or an embodiment of who I was and what I cared about in hospitality that we ended up having like crazy, mad, raving fans. And we also have people that really fucking hated what we did. And I was totally okay with that because it was the exact coffee shop that I wanted to own. And it was the exact coffee shop that I would want to go to as a customer. And it's interesting, I opened it 10 years ago, or about 9.5 years ago. And then the other day, my mum sent me a Daily Mail article where it's still landing, and it just landed in the top 41 or 42 coffee shops in the UK list. And
Oh, well
I
done.
sold it and stepped away 2.5 years ago. But I believe it's that commitment to creating what we want in the world that means it will be successful and it will be something that is special and that touches people. And if I zoom out from that piece of advice, I believe it's exactly the same with us. It's like, can you create a life and express yourself in a way that is so uniquely you that it's magnetic? Like, we've all met those people who are so unapologetically themselves that they are magnetic because we see something in them that we probably want for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I believe that we can create businesses and we can create lives where it just is you. It's not a version of you that you think will make money or a version of you that you think will be lovable. It's a deep trust in, no, that I am good enough. I can express myself in a way that feels genuine, and the world will meet me there, and the right people will find their way to me, whether it's in business or in life.
And I think that's true, isn't it?
It's been my experience.
Yeah, exactly, and mine too. I think it's a truth, and I think it's a wonderful gift when we give ourselves permission to actually just be us. So we've talked about the best advice you've ever received. Now, what was the worst advice that you ever maybe followed, and what did it cost you?
So I guess it's less advice, but more of just a societal norm, or I guess kind of cultural narrative that I inherited as a young man growing up in the UK, was that kind of classic big boys don't cry, and you need to be tough, and it's not okay to be a wuss, and be in touch with your feelings, and all of that stuff that is shoved down our throats growing up in this country. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
It resulted in me not believing that it was okay to talk about how I was feeling. And it actually created this story, the story I had during, because I was very depressed whilst I played. I was very depressed after I played. But the narrative I created around myself was that I was the only person in this team of 50 guys playing that was depressed and that was finding life hard. I now know from being able to have these kinds of conversations. I was living in a house one year when I was at Queen's, the 3 guys living under one roof. We were all having therapy in secret.
Wow.
And what a gift it would have been for us to have been able to talk about that and not feel like we were I used to get on the tube and feel like I was sneaking off to have an affair. I felt so ashamed of the fact that I was having therapy because I felt like I'd failed as a person. It's like, I remember I wrote a post once. I can't remember the stats, but it was something like, I don't know, like 25% of men are struggling with their mental health at any one time. I can't remember exactly the stat, but I remember posting a photo of the squad of 50. We had our team photo for that year. and just saying like, I was struggling with my mental health at this very moment. And little did I know that 25% of this lineup of men were also probably struggling because no one was talking about it.
And is it getting better now in the UK? Are people becoming more accepting of actually talking about men's mental health, all mental health?
It feels like it, but then I'm in a huge echo chamber of this is what I do every day. I speak to men and women about what's going on. So
Yeah.
my sense is yes, awareness is rising, but I'm not sure whether the effectiveness of the support is
Yeah.
rising. That's something I can't really comment on.
And I think that is one of the things is, being able to, for everyone to be able to reach out and to know that it's okay not to be okay. And really, like, mental health needs to be talked about.
Yeah.
It's critical. It's absolutely critical. What's one belief that you had in your 30s that would perhaps make you laugh now? Let's make it a bit happier.
I think the belief that I probably believe that I probably had about 95% impact on the outcomes of what I did. This belief that like I do X and Y happens. There was a very so I took a lot of ownership of the outcomes of my life and probably quite a lot of pride in that. And I just laugh at that now because I think if I look at the tiny speck that I am in the universe, like my impact on what's happening is probably in the 1%. That's fine. And I think I worked with a coach last year called Townsend Wardlaw, and we spoke about how we can take 100% responsibility for our actions and take no responsibility for the outcomes. And I think that's it. I think it's in the Bhagavad Gita, which I can never say, where it says something along the lines of you have the right to the fruits of your labor, but not you have no right to the outcome. And I think there's a lot of freedom in that for me.
Mm. Yeah, and I can see why. So if your 30-year-old self had a theme song, what would it be, Sam?
The first thing that comes up is some form of System of a Down song, which is just pure chaos.
That's fair enough.
No room to breathe, and lots of heavy guitar and shouting would probably sum up my inner state at that time.
At that point. Oh, what about now? If you had a theme song now, what would it be?
Um,
Because you're far from chaotic now.
I tend to listen to kind of lots of piano and lots of very calm music with no words. So I'd probably say something along those lines. Just
Nice.
really gentle background. Yeah.
Peaceful. You have that aura. What's one skill you were terrible at back at 30, but you've completely mastered now?
Asking for help. I wrote a newsletter the other day actually about how asking's a muscle. And the
Mm.
more we ask, the more we practice that asking muscle, the bigger the asks we can make. And I used to think that asking was a sign that I'd failed or that I shouldn't need help or I shouldn't need someone's assistance. And now I think my 30-year-old self will look at the kind of things I ask for now and think, how dare you ask for that? I'm pretty unashamed in what I ask for because they can only say no. And my life expands when I ask for stuff. And it's also, I think I see now that when we ask for help, we are literally giving that person the gift of helping, because I think deep down, one of our innate kind of human needs and desires is to be able to help and support others. By withholding that, or by not asking for help, I believe we're actually withholding a gift from someone.
I love that. That's a beautiful perspective. And if you could have lunch with any historical figure, who would it be and why?
I don't know why, but Jesus comes up. I think I'd have lunch with Jesus.
I think you'll be at a very long table. There a lot of guests come up with.
Yeah, there would be infinite fish and bread though, so we wouldn't run out.
No, that's right. Absolutely. If someone is listening, Sam, and they're in the middle of their own messy chapter right now, what do you want them to hear most?
The one day you'll look back on this moment and you'll understand why it had to happen.
And if you could go back to the exact moment everything felt uncertain for you, what would you whisper to yourself now?
Essentially the same thing, but that one day you'll look back on this moment and you'll be glad it happened. I think I look back on every single moment in my life that felt like my world was ending. And with the perspective that I have now, I wouldn't change any of it.
And and how did all of that, how did the challenges, how have they shaped the way that you now lead, love, and define success?
Well, they've been instrumental. It's like I wouldn't be a man I am today without any of those moments. If you took one away from me, I would be different. I wouldn't be sat here having this conversation with you. I wouldn't probably have my family. I think for me now, the work really is, well, there's so much in just accepting who we are and loving who we are exactly as we are. And once we can be compassionate and kind and loving towards ourselves and stop judging ourselves for every single thing we do or do say and don't say, life gets a lot easier. And people always come to me, or not always, but often come to me wanting to focus on like their high performance or growing their business. And starting with loving yourself is a very, very powerful place to start, because once you can do that, be that, everything else tends to fall into place exactly as you want it.
I love that, Sam. Sam, thank you so much for sharing your story so honestly. And to everyone listening, if this episode resonated, please share it with someone who's navigating their own turning point. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Sam, thank you so much. Best of luck with your book. It's arrived here in Australia and I absolutely love it. I have a look at this all the time. It's in my handbag. Thank you so much. It's just a wonderful, wonderful read. And thank you for joining me today. Is there anything that you would like to say before we leave?
No, just thanks for having me, Fran. It's been really nice to speak. And yeah, I hope someone out there finds something of value in this conversation.
Thank you, and I hope that too. Thank you so much, Sam, and I look forward to series 2. So thank
Perfect.
you. And from what I wish I knew at 30, it's good night and thank you so much. Thanks.